Chapter 911, Mollusks. Narit's enormous body crashed towards the ocean, intent on dragging Zhang Yi into his domain. The Thor's jellyfish he had transformed into was practically indestructible in the ocean. But Zhang Yi let out a derisive laugh. "I don't eat jellyfish." He suddenly opened up dimensional space. In the next moment, several huge crates were extracted from dimensional space. Zhang Yi fired a miniature torpedo directly at one of the crates, hitting it. There was an instant violent explosion. A moment later, the inside of Thor's jellyfish was like snowing. White dust filled the air as blue and white plastic bags and pieces of crate fell. Narit, who had thought he was in control of the battlefield, suddenly let out a scream. His huge body suddenly shrank, becoming drastically smaller. You sprinkled salt into my body." Narit never would have imagined that someone could conjure up tens of thousands of kilograms of salt from thin air. Jellyfish are 98% water. When they come into contact with a high concentration of liquid, they will quickly dehydrate and shrink. Therefore, salt was a more lethal weapon against him than a torpedo. In fact, this attack with salt made Zhang Yi feel a little bad too. It was true that he had stocked up on salt in his warehouse, but that was enough for the rest of his life. Now he had squandered tens of thousands of bags of salt. But there was no time to think about that now. He went back to Blizzard City and discussed the matter with Zhu Zheng. "Getting a batch of salt over here shouldn't be a problem. As long as it works." Zhang Yi repeated his old trick, taking out all the remaining salt in dimensional space and then exploding it again. This time, Narit was afraid to take the brunt of it with his body. The feeling of having someone shove salt in his stomach was like a nightmare. He quickly untied the package on Zhang Yi and fell into the sea with a plop sound. Zhang Yi, however, did not rush to chase after him. He turned around and charged towards Guna, who was sniping at him from afar. Guna had already fired her first shot, which was stopped without a doubt by the two realms' junction. She knew that she was no match for Zhang Yi in a head-on battle and chose to flee. But Zhang Yi was determined to kill her, and fired 10 miniature torpedoes in succession. Although these torpedoes were not as powerful as heavy torpedoes, the combined power of 10 was terrifying enough, and they had the ability to travel at high speeds after entering the water. Guna's speed underwater was obviously not as fast as the torpedoes. She let out a scream, and was sent flying into the sky by the violent explosion. Zhang Yi brandished the Holy Judgment, and with a horizontal slash, he cut the person and the gun in half. He cut off Guna's head, and stuffed it directly into the dimensional space, before running back to Rocky Island without looking back. Now, he and Narit were in a one-on-one situation. Zhang Yi threw the unconscious Zhu Lark onto the ground and quickly took out some supernatural food from dimensional space to replenish his own depleted supernatural powers. Although he appeared calm, the previous shocks had taken a toll on his dimensional space. Continuously activating his powers took an extraordinary toll. As a naturally composed man, he was in no rush to go after Narit. He was still unsure of Thor's jellyfish's underwater abilities. It was better to first replenish his strength on the island and then fight. At that time, whether to fight or to leave, was not up to him to decide. While Zhang Yi was replenishing his strength and restoring his condition, Narit was not idle. Orc ability users have a special skill. They can recover their physical strength and supernatural energy through predation. After using the seawater to dilute the salt in his body, Narit began to devour living creatures around Rocky Island to restore his energy. Soon after, Zhang Yi was still pondering tactics on the island when he saw dozens of lightning bolts tens of meters long rising up into the sky in front of him. They looked like white pillars stuck in the sea. Crackling. One after the other, the lightning pillars blocked the sea surface. Zhang Yi's eyes narrowed as he looked around. He could see that the entire perimeter of Rocky Island was surrounded by these enormous lightning pillars. If you looked down from midair, you would see an extremely frightening sight. In the waters surrounding Rocky Island, which is only 10 square kilometers in area, a jellyfish with an unknown area of fully open body was quietly sinking to the bottom. Narit's body was nearly as big as 10 rocky islands. Zhang Yi's headache worsened when he saw these thunder pillars. His displacement range was only 1 kilometer. The thunder pillars were densely packed, and if he wasn't careful, he would be hit by a misjudged distance. He had seen Narit's power. Even the highest level combat suit would probably be penetrated. Zhang Yi did not have the guts to test the high voltage lightning with his own body. Boom! 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 Several lightning pillars pierced directly through the shore of Rocky Island, through the soil and rocks, and rushed towards Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi picked up Eclipse Arc and quickly retreated with a flash. There were still unconscious crew members on the island and people on Rockflow Island, and Zhang Yi also had a troublesome woman in her hands. If he left at this time, Zhang Yi was quite confident. But it was just that all these people were afraid of being killed. Zhang Yi looked at old Tian and Li Zhongyu, who were lying on the ground, and exhaled impatiently. What a nuisance, I'll just give it a try. If I can kill him, you'll be lucky to have your lives back. Otherwise, you'll just have bad luck. Zhang Yi used the replenishment of supernatural food to improve his physical condition to the best level. He loaded the torpedo launcher with ammunition and then prepared to go down to the sea to fight Narit one last time. But when retrieving things from dimensional space, a sudden flash of inspiration came to Zhang Yi's mind. A good idea came to his mind. Since it's dealing with seafood, there may be an easier way. Zhang Yi did have an easier way. He was not sure about Narit's underwater capabilities, and given his personality, he certainly would not go into the water head first. Since he couldn't go down there, he might as well force Narit out. Zhang Yi took out his reserve of fuel from dimensional space. A large part of it was originally requested from the military supply department in preparation for the long-distance voyage. Zhang Yi had requested an unusually large share, intending to keep some for himself. But he never expected that it would come in handy now. He threw thousands of barrels of fuel oil. The oil drums were thrown into the sea by him, and they exploded directly after touching the thunder pillar. The oil slick quickly spread across the sea surface, and then a raging fire broke out. The giant Thor's jellyfish is 98% water, and once the water source is polluted, it will also erode his body. The sea around Rocky Island was not large, and it was enough to allow thousands of barrels of fuel to quickly spread throughout the entire sea. As Zhang Yi expected, it didn't take long for the thunder pillars that spread across the entire sea to slowly dissipate. Narit had inhaled a large amount of fuel oil inside his body, which was extremely difficult to clean and could not be diluted by seawater, causing him tremendous harm. He knew that he was in no condition to fight at this time and quickly swam towards the deep sea to the south. Chapter 9:12 Ankylosaurus. Now, the offense and defense have changed. Zhang Yi flipped his sword over his back, leapt into the air, and flew in the direction of Narit's retreat. This was the shallow sea, with a water depth of less than 100 meters. Narit's body was particularly easy to spot at this time. After all, wherever he went, there was a large string of oil pollution on the surface of the water. Zhang Yi's mouth curled up into a mocking smile. He calmly loaded the torpedo and began firing underwater. In this state, even if Narit would not be directly harmed by the explosion of the torpedo, the collateral reaction caused by the explosion would continue to burn him. This is because of my limited conditions, otherwise I'll give you some high-level sewage to taste. As soon as Zhang Yi finished speaking, the torpedo had already detonated the fuel oil in Canute's body. A raging fire burned underwater. Even though the temperature was quickly cooled by the seawater, it still caused the mollusk to rapidly wither and suffer tremendous damage. Zhang Yi was very patient, and unhurriedly chased the departing direction of Narit in the air. He still had thousands of miniature torpedoes in his dimensional space, which was enough for him to accompany Narit and play with him slowly. At this time, Narit finally felt the crisis of death. However, he could only continue to escape into the distance, trying to enter the deep sea to resolve this crisis. However, what he got was a continuous torpedo bombardment from above. At this time, he dared not use his lightning ability, as it would only cause the oil inside his body to burn and scorch his body. Zhang Yi's move was ruthless and had just hit his weak spot. To avoid any more complications, let's speed things up. Zhang Yi chased after Narit and fired hundreds of torpedoes at him, watching as his body shrank to 1/100th of its original size. Even so, it was still larger than a blue whale. But this was, after all, the sea. Zhang Yi needed a quick victory to avoid the rest of the Sky Dragon pirates coming to his aid. Even more, he needed to avoid making too much noise and attracting the Colombian Navy. He raised the Holy Judgment in his right hand and began to condense the power of the void. This was his most powerful killing move, but it also consumed a huge amount of supernatural energy. Gathering all the power of the void, he unleashed his most powerful strike. Normally, each strike would drain 1/3 of his supernatural energy. But now, facing the exhausted Narit, Zhang Yi felt that he could use this move as the finishing blow. Time to send you on your way. Die. Zhang Yi raised the Holy Judgment, and the power of the void began to gather frantically on the blade, making the sword look even more profound than the darkness of the night. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. A thunderclap suddenly sounded in the sky. Rumble. A huge roar came from the sky, and Zhang Yi's vision immediately darkened. He felt a huge threat looming over him. At the same time, Narit in the ocean let out an arrogant and unrestrained laugh. Ha ha ha. You're finished. A violent wind gathered black clouds above the entire sea, and the hundreds of miles of sea suddenly became gloomy. Huge lightning bolts flashed like silver snakes through the dark clouds. The wind and thunder roared. A voice as loud as a clanging gong came from the heavens. Are you? Zhang Yi looked up at the sky. Amidst the dark clouds, a black dragon coiled and spiraled, its enormous body stretching high into the sky, its head looking down at Zhang Yi. Heavenly Dragon King, Zhang Yi read the words. There was no need to guess who the other party was. In the entire Starry Sea, the only person who could make Zhang Yi feel a sense of crisis was the overlord of the pirate realm. Li Fengxian, the leader of the Sky Dragon pirates, the diamond-armored dragon. Unexpectedly, his ability was to transform into a black dragon. The dark scales shimmered with a metallic luster, and it looked as if nothing could destroy it. Zhang Yi's mood sank darkly along with him. One-on-one, he was not afraid of either Narit or the Sky Dragon King. But when it came to a fight with two opponents, he obviously wasn't going to fight a battle he wasn't sure he could win. However, even if he wanted to leave now, the Sky Dragon King and Narit couldn't do anything to stop him. With that in mind, Zhang Yi changed the direction of his sword, which had been aimed at Narit, and slashed at the black dragon in the sky. The black flames that had cut through the sky instantly reached the black dragon. The Sky Dragon King's eyes burned with anger. How dare you attack me, you want to die? He roared, triggering a violent storm. The Sky Dragon King opened his mouth wide and directly spat out a surging jet of pitch-black flames. The flames were made even more ferocious by the howling wind. These were real flames, completely different from Zhang Yi's power of the void, which appeared to be flames. However, in terms of power, the two actually cancelled each other out in midair, and it was Zhang Yi's void flames that took the upper hand. Who? The void engulfed the black flame of the Sky Dragon King and eroded into his body. However, the black body, which looked like steel, did not sustain any substantial damage. However, this phenomenon made Zhang Yi frown slightly, sensing that something was wrong. He was not good at attacking, and the Sky Dragon King's ability index was as high as 9,800 points, but he was at a disadvantage in the battle with him. He always felt that there was something wrong with the Sky Dragon King in front of him. It seemed a little weaker than expected. But he didn't have time to ponder the problem. Because of his ability to time echo, he had already sensed Narit's counterattack. While Zhang Yi was battling with the Sky Dragon King, Narit rushed out of the sea and resumed his human form. Black oil was gushing from beneath his feet, and he was filthy all over, looking extremely disheveled. But after changing into his human form, he was able to quickly empty the oil from his body. Narit clasped his hands together and took the shooting stance, pointing his finger at Zhang Yi. Thunder Spear. A pillar of white and purple lightning shot towards Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi had already begun to think about retreating at this point. There were two of them, and he didn't know the abilities of the Sky Dragon King. Although he couldn't lose if he fought on, it would be difficult to win. There was no point in wasting time here. He used spatial shift to evade Narit's attack. Just as he was about to leave, the water beneath his feet rose up very strangely. Zhang Yi did not feel any danger, so this sudden change was not from an enemy. Just as Zhang Yi wondered what the hell it was, a huge bubble floated up from the sea water with a popping sound. It was a giant, colorful bubble. After it surfaced, it was still containing a huge steel battleship. The bubble burst, and the battleship also fell to the surface with a bang sound, splashing high water. A woman wearing a blue and white naval uniform, a broad-brimmed hat, and a long sword at her waist surveyed Zhang Yi with a smile. "Finally I found you. Captain Chaos." Chapter 913, The Mirage Dragon. The sudden appearance of the battleship from the sea took all three people by surprise. Zhang Yi couldn't help but narrow his eyes when he heard her call out his code name. When he saw the ice blue rose emblem on her combat uniform, Zhang Yi realized who had come. One of the 6 investigation teams in the Jiangnan region, the Rose Squad. And the person in front of him was, without a doubt, the captain of the Rose Squad, Linghu Feishue. Zhang Yi just didn't realize that they were the Navy. After Linghu Feishue appeared, she smiled and greeted Zhang Yi, before casting her gaze skyward at the enormous black dragon. "He is not the true form of the Sky Dragon King. I have been tracking that guy's location for months. He is very cautious and has been holed up in a bunker somewhere in the Starry Sea. And the one in front of us is just a clone." Zhang Yi suddenly realized why the Sky Dragon King in front of him did not give him a strong sense of oppression. It turned out that it was not the real one who had arrived. No wonder he had appeared on the battlefield so quickly. The Sky Dragon King was furious when he saw the Rose Squad. "Shit! If I wasn't afraid of the forces behind you, I would have killed you a long time ago." Linghu Feishue didn't care at all. She lowered the brim of her hat and said indifferently, "So what? There's no need to make excuses for your cowardice. If you dared to attack Jiangnan region, you should have expected this outcome." The Sky Dragon King let out a puff of air, and his huge teeth clacked. More than once, he cursed Kanuda in his heart. If that guy hadn't acted on his own and sent troops to Tianhai City, the Sky Dragon pirates would not have been in such a passive situation today. Arrogant. The Sky Dragon King spat out a flaming breath towards Linghu Feishue. Linghu Feishue drew her sword with a clang. She spoke quickly to Zhang Yi, "I'll deal with the Sky Dragon King's avatar, you go kill Narit." With that, she leapt towards the Sky Dragon King. She gently opened her lips, and a colorful bubble surrounded her, causing her to soar into the air. The black flames were incredibly hot, causing the sea water within several miles to rapidly heat up, the ice to melt, and even the fish could not withstand the temperature and floated upwards. Linghu Feishue swept her sword out, and a beautiful and dreamlike scene appeared in the air, just like in a fairy tale. It was countless colorful bubbles, as if spewing from a bubble machine, rapidly flying towards the Sky Dragon King. But these beautiful-looking bubbles exploded the moment they came into contact with the black flames. Boom! One after the other, the colorful bubbles exploded with terrifying power, directly counteracting the Sky Dragon King's flames. Zhang Yi did not hesitate, and with his back hand holding his sword, he chased after Narit and killed him. At this moment, Narit was shocked. He had already realized that in a one-on-one situation, he was no match for Zhang Yi. So he didn't hesitate to dive back into the sea. However, after dehydrating, in order to transform again, he had to absorb a lot of moisture. However, the water source in the surrounding sea had long been polluted and full of oil, so he was unable to transform again. He could only swim desperately to the bottom of the sea. However, at this time, Zhang Yi cast the 3,000 worlds and dived into the water, chasing after him. Narit took 3 sea urchin-shaped sea mines out of his pocket and threw them directly at Zhang Yi, who was behind him. Zhang Yi did not even dodge. The sea mines passed in front of him, then behind him, and by the time they exploded, Zhang Yi had already caught up to him. In human form, Narit's swimming speed was of course no match for Zhang Yi, who had been empowered by technology. He brandished his sword, and the power of the void swept towards Narit like a long snake. Narit was not willing to be taken prisoner, and with both hands he condensed two chains of lightning to counterattack. The power of the void and the chains of lightning collided violently at the bottom of the sea. Narit's chains of lightning were beaten into disarray, dissolving into white light points and disappearing into the sea. Zhang Yi had already closed in, and the torpedo in his hand seemed to be shooting out like there was no tomorrow. Narit dodged left and right. Unable to transform into Thor's jellyfish, he was just a human, and could not withstand such a violent explosion. He could no longer hold back, and forcibly began to absorb the surrounding seawater, transforming into a beast for the second time. Zhang Yi silently exploded dozens of barrels of gasoline directly on the seabed, right around Narit. Narit, shit. Zhang Yi looked at him coldly underwater. You now have a bit more of a sense of heaviness. Then he fired another torpedo at Narit. There was a violent explosion underwater. Narit's transformation was incomplete, only half done, and his body had not yet fully expanded, so he was blown in half. Zhang Yi looked at his mollusk-like body and was at a loss. Where was the source of origin? It's not absorbing well. So he took the holy judgment in his hand and said to Narit, surrender, and I will spare your life. You are a talented individual, and if you are willing to work for me in the future, I will protect you. Narit quickly responded to this, very well, first show me your sincerity. Put away your sword. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes. Impossible to persuade. Do you really think that I can't kill you at the bottom of the sea? Narit did not reply. Zhang Yi's combat effectiveness was indeed superior to his. However, in jellyfish form, unless he was drained of all moisture, as a neurobiological being, as long as any part of his tissue survived, he could regenerate. It was not that easy to kill him. There was another possibility, which was to exhaust all of his supernatural energy, so that he had to revert to human form. However, how could a top-notch Delta-class mutant be easily exhausted? Zhang Yi was already growing impatient. This was the sea, and Narit had been fleeing towards the deep sea area. If he really allowed him to dive into the deep sea, Zhang Yi would also hesitate to pursue. After 4 or 5 months of sailing, he knew the ocean was terrifying. Zhang Yi took a deep breath and said, okay. He once again began to condense the energy of the void, gathering it above his right hand's holy judgment. Narit had seen the power of this move before, and even the Sky Dragon King's avatar had difficulty blocking it, let alone Narit at this time. However, Narit could not escape, and he could only hope that this move would at most sever his body. However, soon he could no longer maintain such delusions. The power of the void in Zhang Yi's hands became increasingly strong, until it was like a huge black sun had appeared in the depths of the sea, making the darkness of the sea even darker, as if it had fallen into an endless night. In the middle of the huge black sun, Zhang Yi was the source, his cold eyes looking down on Narit, the only white light in the eternal night. Narit finally panicked, as if he could see his own Death Star shining. I surrender. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Yi's sword in his right hand fell. Above the sea, the Sky Dragon King's avatar and Linghu Feishue, who were fighting, suddenly heard a deafening noise. They couldn't help but glance sideways, and they saw that a huge ravine thousands of meters long had suddenly appeared on the sea. The seawater poured crazily into it, making a terrifying sound. Chapter 9:14, Defeating the Sky Dragon King. A moment later, Zhang Yi flew up to the surface of the sea, carrying the broken remains of Narit. The power of the void consumed the sea water, while also draining the water in Narit's body, preventing him from maintaining his transformation. Then, Narit's head was severed by Zhang Yi's sword. Seeing Narit die in battle, the Sky Dragon King let out a roar as he looked up at the sky. Chaos, Guang'an. You're looking for death. Linghu Feishue's official title was. ability users with the power to release their abilities had the ability code. Zhang Yi looked up at the Sky Dragon King's avatar. He had been fighting Lingu Feishui up until now, and there was still no clear victor. Zhang Yi judged that his avatar was only about 70% as strong as the original. Lingu Feishui sneered, "Is the reason for the loud noise that your voice is loud? If you really had the guts, you wouldn't have sent a clone here." She placed her left hand in front of her lips and sent a kiss in the air, followed by countless colorful bubbles that flew out and surrounded the Sky Dragon King's clone. Soon, loud explosions sounded one after the other. However, the damage caused to the Sky Dragon King's clone was very limited. Lingu Feishui was helpless. This diamond armor dragon's defenses were comparable to those of a heavy armored battleship. Even if it was just a clone, it was difficult to deal substantial damage with her wide-area AoE attacks. Zhang Yi silently gathered Narit's severed head. "I'll do it," he said, and with his left hand began to draw supernatural food from dimensional space to replenish his energy, while with his right hand he began to condense the power of the void. The Sky Dragon King was outraged at having lost his right-hand man. Dark clouds gathered in the sky and a fierce wind began to blow. Lightning streaks descended from the dark clouds above, like sharp swords, indiscriminately slashing towards the position where Zhang Yi and Lingu Feishui were standing. "Let's do it together." Zhang Yi raised the Holy Judgment in his hand, and Lingu Feishui understood what he meant and raised his own long sword. The black blade cut into the air, and Lingu Feishui's blade also radiated with colorful light, and a rainbow actually shot up against the sky. The two of them joined forces and struck, shattering the Sky Dragon King's lightning and piercing his huge body. There was only a crack sound, and the huge clone cracked like glass, and then quickly spread throughout its body. The Sky Dragon King knew that his clone could no longer be maintained. But he still looked at Zhang Yi and Lingu Feishui with the most vengeful eyes. "Remember, I will never let you go. Sooner or later, I will bite you to death, piece by piece, and turn you into my food." Unfortunately, after uttering his threats, the Sky Dragon King's body collapsed with a loud noise and disappeared into the sky. The sky slowly cleared, the dark clouds slowly dispersed, and the sea around Rocky Island was as calm as if nothing had happened. Zhang Yi also ignored the Sky Dragon King's warning. He looked at Lingu Feishui, who was not far away, and Lingu Feishui also had a playful smile on her face as she looked at him. The two had met for the first time and had worked together to defeat their enemy, so it was clear that they were meant to be. However, even if Lingu Feishui had not appeared this time, Zhang Yi could have defeated Narit and the Sky Dragon King's clone in theory. He just didn't expect such a clone technique. In actual combat, he probably chose to retreat out of a sense of prudence. Zhang Yi and Lingu Feishui landed on the deck of the Blue Rose. The members of the Rose Squad then came running out of the cabin one after the other. They had not participated in the battle just now, mainly because the enemy was a clone of the Sky Dragon King, and even if they won, there would be no substantial gains. Therefore, there was no need for a life-or-death battle. Zhang Yi glanced at them and saw that, as the rumors had said, they were indeed all women. And they were all beautiful women wearing navy combat uniforms in blue and white. There were tall and cold, gentle, petite and cute ones everywhere. In an apocalyptic environment like this, it would be extremely difficult to assemble a mutant army composed entirely of women. But Lingu Feishui had done it, and Rose Squad was not inferior to the other teams in the 6 great investigation teams due to its outstanding strength. No one dared to treat these female soldiers as window dressing. This was admirable. The female soldiers on the ship were also looking at Zhang Yi with curious eyes. The codename Chaos was now famous in the Jiangnan region, and even heard in other regions. Most people believed that Zhang Yi was now the strongest in the Jiangnan region. Women were naturally attracted to strength, which was the same reason that men were naturally attracted to beauty. So they looked at Zhang Yi with eager eyes, and couldn't help but smile ambiguously, unable to help themselves. Lingu Feishui only glanced at them and did not restrain. It was their freedom to look at the men they wanted to look at. She believed that this was also a kind of confidence. Linghu Feishue inserted her long sword into its sheath, stepped forward to Zhang Yi, and then extended her right hand. Rose Squad Captain. Zhang Yi took a deep breath and shook her hand. Chaos. But to be honest, I don't really like being called the captain of the Tengu Squad. You know, it was just a temporary team. And I'm not a dog licker either. Linghu Feishue couldn't help but smile at Zhang Yi's humor. You're really funny. But I have to admit, you're worthy of being the undisputed top master in the Jiangnan region. In the middle of the ocean, it's extremely difficult to kill a master like Narit. Zhang Yi couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the words the ostensible top master. He wasn't one to care about false glory. It was just that Linghu Feishue seemed to be implying something, and he couldn't help but care. Ostensible? So do you know someone who is stronger than me? Linghu Feishue's smile grew even wider. I'm not saying I'm weaker than you. Zhang Yi laughed helplessly and didn't pursue the matter. Either Linghu Feishue was deliberately changing the subject, or she really meant what she said. Anyway, thank you for coming to support us. Zhang Yi felt much more at ease after seeing them. Although he didn't know how the Rose Squad had found him, now that he had an organization, Zhang Yi didn't need to worry about saving the lives of the people on Rocky Island. There is still a group of people on the island that I brought back during my mission. Could you please take them back to Jiangnan District? Just deliver them to Tianhai City. This was what Commander Zhu promised me before. Who knew that after Zhang Yi made this request, Linghu Feishue shook her head gently. It's not that simple to go back now. Zhang Yi showed a strange expression. Why? Linghu Feishue pressed the brim of her cap and said solemnly, this time the commotion is even bigger than you think. The Columbia Navy has completely blocked the sea, and even if our ship returns, they will find out. Chapter 9:15 Guanghan's Request. Zhang Yi frowned slightly. Linghu Feishue continued, it seems that they really care about you. This kind of operation is the first I've seen in my life. Zhang Yi of course understood that it was worthwhile for the Columbia Navy to do so. Because the source of God could help mutants achieve a leap in genetic level. Once obtained, it was possible to create one, or even multiple, mutants of the Epsilon class. Therefore, in order to obtain the source of God, all major powers were willing to go to any lengths. However, Zhang Yi was not at all panicked. He pinched his nose and asked faintly, what is our Navy doing? Can't they come over and help? The Navy Zhang Yi was referring to was naturally the East Sea region. Who knew that? Linghu Feishue laughed disapprovingly. Do you think you'll be any stronger if you go to the East Sea region? She stared at Zhang Yi, her eyes emitting a cold, blue radiance. I believe the East Sea region is also very interested in the secret you hold. So once we ask the East Sea region for help, there is a high probability that we will be invited to the East Sea region for tea first. By then, if you don't tell them everything you know, I think you will continue to have tea for a little longer. Zhang Yi did not deny this. Even though Jiangnan region and East Sea region were the two major powers in the same country, but even close brothers compete with each other. Zhu Jing must have revealed the news of the source of God in order to persuade the East Sea region to help. So, of course, they might be tempted to hog the credit. Zhang Yi was also in a difficult situation. Even if he could use Space Shuffle to go back in time, the members of the Rock Flow group on the ship had information about Star Island. If they were interrogated by professionals, the secrets of Star Island would definitely be revealed. However, if Zhang Yi were to kill all the members of the Rock Flow group here, he was indeed somewhat reluctant. If it wasn't a matter of life and death, he was unwilling to kill someone who had no grudge against him. After thinking about it, Zhang Yi still said to Linghu Feishue, this conflict will be resolved as soon as I return to the Jiangnan region and make a public appearance. By then, it will be pointless for the Columbia Navy to continue to blockade the sea. So I will put the people on your ship first, and I will go back to Jiangnan District first. Linghu Feishue looked at Zhang Yi in surprise. Go back? How are you going to go back? Zhang Yi touched his nose. Those who get involved naturally have some secret methods, so you don't need to ask any more. Upon hearing this, Linghu Feishua didn't say anything more. She had only been ordered to come and support Zhang Yi, and she definitely wouldn't ask any more questions about anything else. So she nodded. Okay, where are they all? Zhang Yi pointed to Rocky Island in the distance. They're on the island. You come with me. Commander Zhu's niece is up there too. In the Starry Sea, in a bunker deep within an island. Sky Dragon King Li Fengxian suddenly opened his eyes, then covered his head in pain. His ability to split was called Mirage Dragon. Although he could project himself from a distance, if his split self was destroyed, he himself would suffer the backlash. Damn it, damn it, damn it. These damned guys have already destroyed 3 of my fleets. Was this meant to push me to the brink? At this moment, he could only feel powerless and furious. Because he didn't even have the courage to show his head. Even though he was the overlord of the Starry Sea and the king of the pirates, but compared to truly top-level forces, he was still so weak. It only took the Reaper of Love to reduce this pirate king to ashes. Power. I must gain more power to stabilize my position in the ocean. The Sky Dragon King's headache slowly subsided after a long time. Enduring the tingling sensation, he slowly recalled the intelligence transmitted by Narit before he died. Zhu Lark had confessed everything under his electrotherapy. Although neither Zhang Yi nor Zhu Jing had told her the secret of the source of God. But after spending 4 or 5 months at sea with Zhang Yi and the Rock Flow Group, she had more or less learned some secrets. For example, Li Zongyu's secret was related to mutants, and it might be closely related to causing mutations and making mutants stronger. For example, Li Zongyu came from Star Island. When the Sky Dragon King first received the information, he vaguely sensed something. He was more sensitive to this matter than anyone else. The reason why he was able to quickly grow from an ordinary pirate in the Starry Sea to the Pirate King who dominated one side was because he had once found a special substance in the deep sea. Since then, he had embarked on the path of becoming a mutant. I must seize this opportunity. Once I break through my current bottleneck and become a mutant of the Epsilon class, even the Huashu Kingdom will be afraid to make a move against me. The Sky Dragon King made up his mind in his heart. Zhang Yi led the Rose Squad onto the island. Seeing so many unconscious people on the island, Linghu Feishua let out a long sigh. What a huge project. Her subordinates quickly went over to examine the bodies of the unconscious people. Zhang Yi said, it seems that they were controlled by something. Although I killed the caster, I can't guarantee what will happen to them, so be careful. As soon as he finished speaking, a female soldier with short neck-length hair and an eye patch over her left eye picked out a white worm from the passenger's mouth. She held the squeaking white worm on the tip of her sword. This is called a tongue-pressing insect. It will settle under the host's tongue and control the host's movements. The person you mentioned should be Guna of the first squad. We have crossed swords with her a few times. Zhang Yi nodded with a smile. Since you know what to do, I'll leave it to you. The other crew members began to clean the passengers of the tongue-pressing insects. At this time, Linghu Feishua called Zhang Yi aside. Captain Chaos, I have a request. I wonder if you can grant it. Zhang Yi smiled and said, tell me what it is. Linghu Feishua said, you killed Narit, and I want his share of the origin. Of course, I won't take what you have for nothing. You can name your price. Whether it's weapons, ammunition, food, or even supernatural medicine, I can give it to you. Zhang Yi was stunned. He had never imagined that Linghu Feishua's condition would be like this. Do you want to hear what you're saying? The origin of a mutant with a supernatural ability index of 9,000, and you want me to let you have it? Linghu Feishua said calmly, at your current level of supernatural ability, the effect of absorbing the origin will no longer be significant. But for me, it's just right. Zhang Yi didn't comment on this statement. He knew that most captain-level mutants in the Jiangnan region had extreme difficulty in improving after their supernatural ability index reached 9,000 points. For example, Deng Shintong, who was cultivated with a large amount of resources, eventually slowed down to around 9,300 points and stopped improving. However, he is not like Deng Shintong. Zhang Yi sometimes feels that his body is like an abyss, and this process of absorbing the origin for evolution is far from over.